welcome to the Album Spotlight Podcast, the only podcast that puts a spotlight on albums. My name's Noah.
My name's Freddie.
And today we are going to do what is probably going to be a more serious episode because we are talking about a very serious album.
Indeed.
We're going to be talking about The Fire this time. That's a various artists compilation that's compiled by Grant Wakefield.
Yes. Yes, I agree.
So far, nothing but facts. Just
Yeah,
saying the
so
facts.
far that's all correct. Yeah. This is a really fascinating and extremely unique piece of music. I don't know that I've really heard anything else like it because it is really I don't know. It gets called sort of. Wikipedia even calls it just like an audio documentary.
Right.
I think it's when you hear that, it sounds like it's really a it's not like a music album, but it also very much is a music album. It has very comes generally out of the sort of UK IDM kind of scene. Intelligent dance music is what that means. But we're talking about people like Aphex Twin, like that kind of scene. And the
Yeah, IDM as a label, as a genre name, fucking sucks.
yeah. Yeah, it's one of those really bad. It's like one of the worst genre names. It's worse than art pop.
Yeah, I've heard abstract dance music suggested as an alternative name for it, and I like that a lot better. But I don't think that's. I think the deed has been done as far as IDM goes.
Yeah, people tried to make it less pretentious, but it's so it's basically so it's rooted in this very real music scene of this really heady, technical leaning, often kind of sparse, geared towards home listening kind of electronic music. On one part, it's a very really interesting IDM album. The actual release of it has the actual album, and then it has all the instrumentals as B-sides. And you can just listen to the instrumental album, and it's also just a good IDM album. But the experience of the first part is really a heavily stylistically consistent kind of IDM album, which is setting the backdrop for highly politically charged and surgically precise. I think I'm going to say that a lot. Surgically precise documentary on the Gulf War, as well as the aftermath in the 90s with the sanctions regime and so on.
Yeah. What I have gathered from what little information is available about this album online, a visual component was going to be imagined for it, but the BBC wouldn't have it because they said that they don't do rant pieces. And it's very angry. It's a very angry documentary.
It's also true,
yeah. It's okay. Is it a bad thing to quote rants about things that are true and are relevant and people aren't talking about? What we got here with this album was kind of the plan B, but it worked out pretty geniusly. That's what a plan B,
Yeah. Occasionally, as a music fan who listens to tons and tons of new music all the time, one of the fun things is just having one of these completely out of nowhere experiences where you just listen to something like you would at any other album. And that's sort of what happened with this one. Is just I put it on, and immediately I was just holy shit, this is one of my favorite albums. This is immediately just one of the best albums I've ever heard. I think I feel comfortable saying that on this one. I think it is incredible.
And this is one of the reasons we wanted to do this podcast is this is kind of the white whale that we're always looking for when you're trying to find when people talk about underrated albums and stuff.
Yeah,
you're normally hoping that you get something of this quality that is this unknown, and then you get to show it to people.
Yeah, it's really that just you finding just a diamond, just
yeah,
buried there deep in the internet. Yeah,
and like you said, it really there is nothing like it that I've heard. like the other compilation we've talked about on the podcast, the Sound Bombing 2. In a way, it's kind of the opposite of that in the approach that it takes, because that one is really about highlighting each artist and coming
Mm-hmm.
together as a whole. But this one, the artists themselves kind of, I mean, the work is fantastic. Like the instrumentals, they have a lot of electronic heavyweights here, but
Mm-hmm.
it's all in service of this narrative, much
Mm-hmm.
more than it is like, oh, this track is like really showing off this producer's thing and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Um, which isn't to say there aren't quote unquote highlights, but at the same time, it's kind of like a weird thing to to talk about with an album like this.
Yeah, it's something about it is just kind of hilarious to call it a compilation because it's just
Yeah,
like it's so much more like there are so few like proper like albums that are is committed to like a singular vision just
yeah.
completely consistently. It's just like it's just like so far,
Like laser
it's just like
focus is
yeah,
underselling
just
it.
completely, yeah. We should talk about some of like just the background. It's just like impossible to engage with this record without engaging with
The
kind of
historical the
the
context that it's talking about.
yeah, the event it's around.
What was the
Yeah.
Gulf War about, Freddie?
What was the Gulf War about? Well, okay, so I mean, there's a so the Gulf War happened in the 90s, and I believe it was 91. And
Yeah, it was like
it
90
was
to 91.
the way it gets seen now is it was sort of like the trial run of the Iraq War, like the 2003 invasion.
Yeah,
Which in some ways is kind of true. They're both like, essentially the U.S. against Saddam Hussein's government. What's interesting too, I mean, the way this album came out in 2002, right? Yeah. So
yeah.
it was like this album came out like right before the second Iraq War. Because I think a good way to see it, right, is there's really like three parts to like the sort of extended like the sort of conflict proper. There was the Gulf War, there was the sanctions regime after the Gulf War throughout the 90s, and then there was the invasion in 2003 and like the Iraq War that we know and love or hate depending on who you are. Uh, and so I mean, so basically the lead up, I'll just like summarize very quickly. So Iraq is it's a country in the Middle East, originally I believe British colony, and gained independence sort of as the region was decolonized, kind of around like World War II. It went through struggles similar to like a lot of places in that area, well, in many places in the world of this like tangled mess of maybe you have your formal independence, but the economic structure has been changed very little. In the case of, and generally this is what the sort of relationship set up in these places is they have certain natural resources. So like for Iraq, it's oil. They have a lot of oil, and so they've been sort of defined by this struggle to like rather than having their economy just be completely open for I mean, well, first is the UK, and then the US in more recent decades to sort of come in and take it, mine it from the have U.S. corporations mine it from the ground, send the profits overseas. They've been fighting for having like some level of economic independence, being able to like mine their oil or whatever you call it with oil, obtain their oil themselves, use
I
it,
guess drilling.
drill for oil themselves, sell it at with user themselves, and then sell it at mostly sell it at reasonable at prices that actually are and have the money actually go back into the country to support it, so they can build and industrialize and whatnot, and not just be purely like an exporter of resources. Yeah, so the US's basically relationship with Iraq has been interesting because so as like Saddam Hussein came to power, and his party's called the Ba'ath Party. That's like it's sort of this like hodgepodge kind of ideology, which is like a little bit some like sort of third world nationalism, a little bit of like semi kind of socialism, a little bit, and then just like all kinds of like different things mixed in there. In the early 80s, the U.S. was more concerned rather than with Iraq, they were concerned with Iran, who had just had their Islamic Revolution in '79, and they were interested. And so for a time, they enjoyed like the Saddam Hussein regime enjoyed a relatively friendly relationship with the U.S. This sort of culminated in the Iran-Iraq War in like the early to mid 80s, which was essentially a conflict that they basically was inflamed by the U.S. and allies basically funneling arms to both sides in order to just make it as shitty and terrible as possible and like ruin both countries as much as possible.
Yeah, the U.S. was sending weapons to Iraq, and then through Israel also sending weapons to Iran.
Yeah, which is cool.
Which fucking
the
rocks.
U.S. really a force for peace in the world, isn't it? The U.S.
Yeah, we're peacekeepers here.
So yeah, so basically there was this long, long, bloody, awful conflict, which really which destroyed in a lot of ways large parts of both countries. But the essentially what it finally ended with Iraq being $80 billion in debt, having like these war debts to pay off, especially to I think it was to like Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, I think were the big ones. You know, and it should be said like the Iraq was actually like doing considerably better than a lot of their neighbors in a lot of ways. Like internally, they had you know, like Saddam was not a particularly great person in many ways, or you know,
he had his issues.
He has issues, but basically, if you look at basic indicators of things like education, you know, people's like social mobility, ability to like things that people were steadily improving. Yeah, people had access to electricity,
healthcare, education,
the healthcare, all these things in a way they never had before, and people were able to live somewhat full lives, certainly compared to before and after. But yeah, so that was put into jeopardy with Iraq being ridiculously in debt. So they're all part of, by the way, they're all part of this this like organization which is called OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. Yeah. It's like an alliance between all of these countries who are net exporters of oil. So there's like Iraq, a bunch of these like places in the Middle East, also I think Venezuela. The idea is they all make agreements about how much oil they're going to export, and they have certain quotas set doing that. And then the idea is that if they're controlling the amount of oil going onto the international marketplace, they can control the price of oil. So rather than, and which allows them to, you know, maximize the profits going into their, you know, countries. And you can of course be like, yeah, they're okay. They're just like profit hungry, whatever, which is, you know, true. But like also these are, a lot of these are recently like post-colonial nations or at least like in very clear, relationships of like dependency, you know, with sort of the first world, and they have they're fighting for like national sovereignty, and a lot of like a big part of that is like being able to like keep profits from their natural resources from themselves. So that's essentially the idea of OPEC, is like to control the price of oil in order to have all these countries like benefit in terms of the profits they can bring in from it. So basically, so Kuwait is also a member, and Iraq is sort of like the international leader of it. Kuwait, what they start doing is increasing their production and like export of oil, and so they're basically flooding the international marketplace, which sends down the price of oil. And Iraq does not like this because, of course, their economy relies something like 90% on oil export or something like that. It says this sometime on the album. It's like every time it would go down by $1, Iraq's national income would go down by $1 billion.
Yeah.
They're like tremendously in debt, and Kuwait is now like violating their quota and like decimating their economy in this very like direct way.
Yeah.
So of course Iraq isn't very happy, and then Saddam has all these ideas about what's going on. He comes to think that it's like the Americans putting them up to it, which, you know, maybe
but, there may be some truth to that.
But so basically then the tensions rise. Also, Kuwait really wants Iraq to repay their wartime debts, and there's this thing, it's like it seems that Iraq wasn't actually opposed to repaying their wartime debts. They just like could couldn't do it when they didn't have money, and then it was so it's this escalating thing, and then eventually Iraq finally invades Kuwait, and then quickly after the U.S. then swoops in. Well, first, so what the U.S. does is impose sanctions on. They go to the UN and they're like, we hate injustice, and look at this injustice they're invading. We must punish them with sanctions. It's essentially like punishing their ability to trade with other countries and cutting off their economy from the world. And so they get these sanctions imposed, and then soon after the U.S. invades and blows a bunch of shit up, and that's sort of
how it went.
Yeah, that's essentially the story. Well, and then there's more after, but yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just talked for like 10 years. But,
I was looking into it. People say that they literally call the Gulf War the Good War.
Yeah, that was the just one.
Yeah, it's one of its actual nicknames. Like in contrast to the Iraq War, I think it's kind of indicative of how we think about war in this country. Like, we almost judge these wars more on like a logistical or an execution level rather than like a morality basis.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, this one was the good one. The Gulf War was the good one because we did what we were trying to do, and then the war in Iraq we fucked up, I guess.
Yeah.
Like,
I know, it's like, oh, it was handled poorly.
Yeah.
Handled incompetently. Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth saying is like, I promise we'll get into the album eventually. Like particularly if you've grown up in the U.S. like we have, you have this sort of like American exceptionalists. You're talking about kind of like, oh, we are generally interested in good, and then we're in doing good in the world, and like it just sort of it fails sometimes because of like incompetence and needs better governance and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's like,
when we do something wrong, it's usually misguided. It's not that we just like did something
like
morally wrong. We knew what we were doing.
Yeah, it's like, oh gosh, we should not have gone into there, and fucking Vietnam, that was that was silly. We had the right idea, but like no, that was not the right thing to get.
We definitely had to stop those communists, but like it just wasn't meant to be,
I know, we couldn't let people just like a popular communist government come to power that would, wildly popular among the people. No, that would be no. That part is just no. Yeah, it's like
we have to save them from themselves.
Yeah, it's the only way. Or if that's like how you're used to thinking, just consider like sort of to first approximation. One can understand U.S. foreign policy as being what best ensures the short and long-term interests of U.S.-based capital. So in this case, we're talking about like oil companies and things like that. And of course, there's like you can be very there's all kinds of ways to sort of pick that apart. What the interest of U.S. capital is a very non-homogeneous thing. There's different types of capital. There's industrial capital, there's finance capital, and there's all these things will fight with each other with very harsh ways, all that. But consider you have these corporations that are based in the U.S., operate all across the world, and they profit best. Governments outside the U.S. allow them to flow in and out, and allow their money and resources to flow in and out as like freely as possible.
Yeah,
that's just like I guess how to think. It's just like to first approximation. That's like how to think of it. And that's like what U.S. foreign policy is all about: is ensuring that like resources and capital can flow in and out of these places as freely as possible, allowing them to be exploited as efficiently as possible. By multinationals.
It is not about ensuring peace globally, and it is not even about ensuring the well-being of American citizens, like not even privileging our own people over anyone else's. It's like purely for the capital.
Yeah. Okay. Should we talk about the actual album?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, I really love how this album starts with the because this first track is so much of it is about it starts back in like it talks about like ancient Babylon.
Yeah.
You know,
Like,
it
it
goes
goes
all the way
back
back.
there.
It goes like all the way back. You feel like the life and all the like historical richness of this civilization in this way that just gets completely occluded. The way you hear it talked about on the news or whatever, in any sort of popular, like it's just like that's so much the discussion you get of like Iraq in the U.S. is just the sort of it's like, oh yeah, that's like the war place. That's like the war and the
Yeah.
oil place.
That's like it's where people don't know any better than to bomb things all the time. Like that's kind of how we have to paint it, because
Yeah, it's just like, oh,
otherwise you start to
it's,
like question things and feel a little bad about how we're always bombing things over there.
yeah, and it just has to be this like vaguely. I mean, I feel like that is something a lot of that's like sort of the default in the U.S. If you haven't like thought about it, is you carry around just like this sort of vaguely racist notion of just like, yeah, I guess I just can't solve their problems over there, man.
Yeah.
So hard. Yeah.
It's like everything's so complicated. They just all like seem to hold these weird grudges. I don't get it.
Yeah. God, that's like fucking Redditor shit. It's just like, oh, what a peace in the Middle East. What a joke. They'll never figure it all out over there. It's like, it's like, oh, God, yeah. So yeah, they have this again like this like really gorgeous soundscape going on. It's just the whole thing is like an ambient song basically with the voiceover. When he mentions, because he goes from Babylon and then goes to the Islamic Empire, and he's like, and their new religion, Islam, and then immediately this like the sample of like Islamic prayer like comes in the background, and it's like perfectly harmonized with like the pads in the
Yeah.
soundscape that are already there, and it sounds so cool.
The Arab Empire and its new religion, Islam. Rhymed poetry, geometry, our number system, all come from Baghdad.
And he's talking about like all the things that were invented in the civilization, and you're just like, oh my god, this is just like beautiful. It's so like rich, and it's so you feel like the how much emphasis there is on you know the people here. There being people
Yeah.
and society and history in this place.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this ambient track is courtesy of Michael Stearns.
Mm-hmm.
Stearns. It's probably Stearns.
Yeah, that motherfucker.
I was not familiar with prior to this album.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting progression it has too. Is it starts very ambient, and sort of moves slowly, and then you have a sort of like then you have some like kind of steadily accelerating kind of songs that finally get drums on the third song, and you have this sort of steady acceleration, and then like later on it's just completely like, you know, it's like completely like fucking balls to the wall, like just like drum and bass kind of shit, and then it like sort of comes back out again. Yeah, it's really it's a really fluid structure.
Yeah, like when we say it's an IDM album, I think that is true, but it's also kind of a generalization because from track to track it'll have uh, yeah, like whatever kind of serves the momentum of the story. I like the second track, the playground, with Ashra or Ashra,
Yeah.
um, who is an artist that I've listened to before this album actually.
Yeah, new age person.
Yeah, like kind of Berlin school, like a really classic electronic artist. Um, like their album New Age of Earth is like awesome. Just by the way, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, this is like I love how like so immediately in the song, like the tone of the synthesizers, it takes these very eerie intervals.
Qasim himself
Suffered a terminal illness before a firing squad.
but in 1972, the Ba'ath government nationalized Iraq's oil.
I mean, like the tension is really palpable just sonically.
Yeah.
Yes, this is when the CIA is meeting with Saddam Hussein, um, which yeah, we like to
Mm-hmm.
not talk about that. How we were very buddy with Saddam Hussein at first.
Yeah.
This is kind of like setting up the Iran-Iraq War before, like prior to the
Yeah.
Gulf War.
Yeah, the other thing I forgot in the history is, but yeah, the original revolution, the 58 one, is this guy Qasim who came to power, who was sort of like a left wing nationalist kind of thing.
Right.
And he was and Saddam and the Baathists were like an opposition party. Yeah, so yeah, at this point they were backed by or at least in talks with the CIA. Yeah.
Yeah, the same shit as Vietnam. It's just like, oh, we can't let that happen. Don't be doing that. Don't be doing socialism over there.
Yeah.
The moment in the track where it says Qasim himself suffered a terminal illness before a firing squad, like that always like makes me shiver a little bit. It's like, well,
Yeah.
I guess that's like a real quote. Like that's how a CIA member said it.
God, these people are disgusting. Ugh.
Yeah.
There's so many moments like that. They include in this album. Just this like horrible shit people say.
Yeah, because it's not just narration. It's lots of like firsthand, like people talking about what's going on, like like the players themselves. It gives the album like so much more rhetorical weight because like the way that the U.S. government was talking about it, like they don't give a fuck. There's a quote in here, our boy Henry Kissinger. He says covert actions should not be confused with missionary work. Like, fuck you, asshole. Nobody said it was.
God.
Like, we fucking know you're like, don't do the covert actions, you piece of shit.
Yeah. Yeah, the first track in a way is kind of like, it's almost kind of peaceful, really.
Yeah.
Like,
it's the calm before the
certainly-
storm.
yeah, it's very like calm before the storm, and then there's we have this period of kind of like acceleration. And it's very interesting, right? Because it starts with like doing these like 1,000-year jumps in history. Basically, as we get closer to the events that we're really talking about, and especially as we get into like the immediate chronology where it's like things are like heating up, tension-wise, it becomes like the music itself gets like quickly much more like intense, and so you have this like first like the Ashra song has like all these really pretty tense moments but still no drums, and then Lines in the Sand, which is Higher Intelligence Agency, is the third song, finally has drums and has this really cool like glitched out IDM thing. And so here it's talking about a kind of like the sort of back and forth with like Iraq and Kuwait. It gets sort of like more, it has this really cool kind of like it's like the synth line, or it's like very or it might be like a sample or something, but it's like it sounds kind of like a dial-up modem or something, and it kind of just like floats around back and forth. It sounds like really sharp and like defined.
Oh yeah, in Lines in the Sand.
In Lines of the Sand, yeah. It talks about this thing too in this era. God, there's so many like sort of interlinked kind of like geopolitical things going on, but like the another one was like as the Soviet Union was actively collapsing. And of course, like throughout the whole Cold War, the U.S. was able to have this like super inflated military budget, and was in like, you know, keep the whole the sort of classic military industrial complex thing going. You know, essentially like this like constant inflow into the U.S. economy by like directly giving government money to these places to like make weapons and stuff. And so to keep this like arrangement going, there's this big like there's this kind of crisis. With no more Soviet Union, it was like, oh god, who's gonna be our new bad guy? And so this was like another reason why Saddam was like useful, because it was like, oh, here we go, here's a new bad guy. We can like use all these like planes and bombs and shit we have sitting around because we need to keep producing them to like stimulate the economy.
It's like what a fucking stupid way to design an economy, you know?
Yeah, it's, oh my god. Yeah, I mean, I guess I could say the Lines in the Sand ends, I believe, with the invasion of Kuwait, and it's this really tense ending where it has like this like synthesizer, or like the thing that's been floating around like starts to like rise in pitch, and you like,
oh yeah,
you like, feel the tension as they're as like it's gearing up. It feels like a plane is like launching or is like a lifting off or something.
Yeah, I can hear that. But it's coupled with the narration. It's just this really palpable sense of dread.
Yeah.
It says in the song in Lines of the Sand, while Iraq was at war, Kuwait had moved into the Ramallah oil field. In November, Kuwaiti officials met with the CIA and agreed to take advantage of the deteriorating economic situation in Iraq to put pressure on that country's government to delineate our common border. The CIA gave us its view of appropriate means of pressure. So the implication there is that the CIA is like directly stoking this war, which is kind of what
Yeah.
Saddam was claiming. But so it seems like there is like good reason to believe that there is truth to that. The thing with pointing that out is the narrative that we're told about the Gulf War is that it was like justified, and like us Saddam shouldn't have like got into Kuwait. We set him up. like it was a conscious thing to stoke the tensions so that the war could happen. Then we would have a reason to
Yeah.
jump in there.
Been there. Mess those mess them up.
Pretty much.
Yeah, because I mean, there's like what the U.S. is trying to, like, they want regime change in Iraq very clearly at this point. They want some friendly government who will not no longer nationalize the oil fields. But yeah, they're inflaming these tensions, and then it finally breaks loose.
So the war is like actually happening in
Yes, the wars
track
have
4.
the invasion, particularly like the part where it's just Iraq invading Kuwait, is now happening in fourth track. Get Thee Behind Me, and it's a lot of it. It's
Right.
about the instantiation of the like sanctions regime.
Yeah, this is like when President Bush says that, like, tells Congress that there's 120,000 Iraqi troops moving towards the Saudi border, and because it says in one of the voice clips that the Soviet satellite pictures indicate that there's less than 20% of that size that are actually there.
Yeah,
I thought that was an interesting detail.
yeah,
The invasion was condemned, sanctions levied, and Iraq's assets frozen the following day.
the U.S. wants to like punish Iraq as much as possible, bring about this regime change, and so they're blowing up the numbers around this thing to make it like look as bad as possible. This invasion, that's part of what they're doing, is like trying to like have other countries back this. That sort of merges into the next song,
Yeah.
the box. So these are both really like getting increasingly kind of frenetic electronic music.
By the way, the Box Orbital classic song,
Oh yeah,
the remix here is really cool too.
yeah. Or no, yeah. This version isn't called the box. It's called it's actually called Counting on New Friends. Spotify, it's called
Yeah.
The Box, remixed by Bump and Grind. So I mean, I just want to like give a word towards like because like Sanctions has this sort of like legalistic kind of sound to it.
Yeah, it's like,
it
oh,
would-
boring, I'm gonna turn my brain off now.
Yeah, it's like whatever. It's like something politics, whatever. But like it's important to just like see what this actually means, because this is essentially they're trying to blockade the country. They're trying to like shut off the flow of supplies in and out, which meant very quickly that people went from having a relatively speaking prosperous life immediately before this to very large part of the population facing like pretty intense like food scarcity, because they simply couldn't like import food in anything remotely sufficient to feed everyone. So this is like this is what it means, like anytime they're talking about like the U.S. pushing sanctions on this or that country, and they talk all about like, oh, they're so evil, this and that.
Yeah,
then
you gotta
it's-
punish them or whatever, but
They're
they're punishing the civilians.
Because it'll be this thing where it's like, oh, they're like anti-democratic. So they'll say this about like Iran or whatever. It's like any of these like so-called these like the evil countries, and they'll be like, well, they're anti like democratic or whatever, and we defend democracy, or they're like against freedom or something, and then they're like, so we gotta like punish them. But what this does, these sanctions, is it doesn't punish the government, it punishes the people. It makes the people
Yeah.
starve, and this is like something that's been said I forget if they have samples specifically talking about this here, but there's like the point is that
It's supposed to force the people to rise up against the government and do what America wants.
Yeah.
Is the idea.
Yeah, they're like trying to like institute regime change by like making the people suffer so that they'll overthrow their government, which always works great.
Yeah. Starving people are great at fighting.
Yeah, it's really a time for like building a serious political project. Is when you're starving.
Yeah.
Being starved. You definitely want to support the people doing it. Yeah. Anyway, so it's.
I mean, but they don't really care if it works like that. Like the American government doesn't really care if it actually works as stated, because as long as you destabilize it enough, you can just prop up a puppet, like when it's all said and done anyway.
Yeah.
So like it works for them either way.
Yeah,
with the
like as
sanctions.
long as they get like essentially the government that they that's like amenable in the end. It's like whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the civilians are used as pawns. It's
Yeah.
like anytime you hear the word sanctions.
Yeah.
If there is an ideal time for war in the desert, it's before March, but that drastically shortens the time for sanctions to bite.
But yeah, so the U.S. is like they have these sanctions, and now they're like their supplies from outside the country are like severely constricted, and now they want to. They're talking about destroying the sort of internal productive capacity of Iraq, and so they have some quotes of people saying this very explicitly, and so the idea is that it'll make the sanctions bite. I think is the quote.
Yeah.
It'll like if they destroy all their civilian infrastructure, then they and now they can't import anything, then that's like the sanctions will bite because people will like definitely not be able to access like the basic necessities.
Which is ghoulish.
Just fucking insane. It's just disgusting. They pushed this UN Security Council resolution calling for all necessary means to restore peace and security, whatever. Basically, it's like a it's like allowing them to invade, and the no votes are Yemen and Cuba. In the case of Yemen, well, Cuba they're already punishing to like essentially the max, but Yemen they cancel all U.S. aid for doing that, which is real fucking cool. Yeah. Anyway.
God. But yeah, this song instrumentally is awesome.
Yeah.
The box has that classic melody in it. And it has these like really ominous synths behind it.
Yeah, it's so like tense and kind of you're like, oh no.
This is the track where the baby in the incubator story happens.
Oh yeah.
The Human Rights Caucus, like this is one of the events that like precipitates America going to, like joining this war. That there's this testimony from this woman who's saying that Iraqi soldiers that had invaded Kuwait were taking babies out of the incubators in the hospitals, like raiding the hospitals and leaving the babies to die, like just intentionally, like very cruelly.
Yeah.
Letting the babies die like that. The worst thing you can do, right, is to do something like that to. Yeah, it's like it's just about the worst thing you can think of, right?
Why are you not invading them right now? Look how horrible.
Yeah, she just happened to be the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador to the U.S., which is conveniently not brought up, although it was like very known to them. But like really, it's just that they can use that as a soundbite.
Yeah.
So the president could be, and it says that he repeated the incubator story 6 times, as it says in the song here.
Yeah.
Like if you have that as a soundbite, then you're like, okay, then you have like the American public's approval to go to war now, based on just like, hey, Mr. Ambassador guy, can you like get your daughter to like kind of make some shit up about?
Yeah, say some horrible shit.
Like say they kill babies or something. That'll probably do it.
Yeah. it's so eerie because there's like a very direct modern parallel to this. You know, I think you'll know what I'm talking about. Is the I think we all probably remember the 40 beheaded babies. I think it was 40. I feel like the number changed a couple times or something.
Yeah, it probably did.
It was like I remember people were made this comparison to this thing during the Gulf War very directly. This was like in the immediate aftermath of like October 7th last year, which is of course this very horrible, you know, attack that killed a lot of civilians. But in the process of, you know, sort of manufacturing consent for the you know, genocide that was then unleashed on Gaza and over the last year, there are all these ridiculous claims that just circulated the media. One of them was this thing that like, oh, they went in and they like cut off the heads of 40 babies or whatever, and then like,
Yeah.
and fucking Biden repeated that one.
Yeah.
He just said it.
Turns out you could just like keep saying this shit like over and over again,
Yep.
and it just works every time. I guess like
It just works. It's like, well, you better be bombing all the civilians in this place. Look at this story I made up about somebody who's from that comes from that place. You know, it's, oh god.
you wouldn't feel that bad if they were like killing the babies, right? You know, like they're baby killers. I mean, you gotta do something.
Yeah, you gotta do something. Why? Yeah. God.
Yeah, they can't even come up with a new fucking story. It's god damn it.
Yeah.
Time is a flat circle.
Yeah.
Because once you say it, like even if it's disproven afterwards, it sticks to some degree.
Yeah.
Like it's a lot easier to put a lie out there than to change the public perception to like the pre-lie state, you know?
Yeah.
Like you can't unsay it.
Yeah. I know, like once it's said, it'll propagate, and debunking it is like way harder than just spreading it. It's just like
Yeah, because it's always going to be less interesting, you know? It's just like, oh, the like ridiculous thing that happened didn't happen, like isn't as good of a story as the ridiculous thing happened.
Yeah.
Just a bit of how propaganda works here on the Album Spotlight podcast.
Yeah. Spitting some fucking facts on this one. Oh my god. Yeah, no, it is funny. I mean, I feel like we certainly don't shy away from talking about politics on the show usually, but I don't know. It's usually not. This one is certainly like sort of in a class of its own. I mean, it just sort of necessitates getting political, and it's just like I don't know. So yeah, you can sort of see the. So yeah.
Yeah, like how you engage with the album is definitely going to be largely influenced by your worldview going into it.
Yeah.
But it's very factual, just about like, you know, here are some clips, here's what people say, here are the historical events as they happened. Just like arranged in this, in my opinion, very artful way.
Yeah.
But yeah, on the Horror of Babylon by Pansonic, things really heat up.
Thus with violence shall that great city Babylon be thrown down.
We're like the bullies of the world right now. Do you know that?
The intro of this song is really cool. It's almost like this. You ever listen to a meditation audio or something with the like singing bowls?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of what this sounds like here, but like evil.
Yeah. It brings back like the Babylon thing with this Bible quote.
Yeah. I guess like part of it that we haven't talked about is like part of this whole Gulf War background that we haven't talked about is like the religious side of it, like the religious conflict, like kind of framing the war in this, you know, war between like Babylon and the Israelites kind of thing. Like part of the American exceptionalism project is this like Zionist idea that like us Americans are basically the new nation of Israel, or we're like supporting Israel, and we have to like overthrow Babylon.
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, it's like really fucking gross, but it's this like divine intervention, like divinely ordained kind of like attitude that Like I think that there is an element of that to American exceptionalism. Like it's kind of baked into it.
Or yeah, they like use this metaphor and sort of intersperse it, or like and like immediately sort of put it in conversation with the very literal description of the this is like the start of like the U.S. bombing campaign, flying across the whole country and just destroying so much like civilian infrastructure. The as they talk about, you know, destroying electrical grid systems, destroying factories, destroying all this stuff that like is necessary for the functioning of the country. It was like mostly just like dumb bombs, like, you know, where they just kind of drop them from a plane and it lands wherever it does, kind of thing. It was just like, yeah, that's like it was just like B-52s, which are like the tried and true, you know, those are like the same plane that, you know, dropped the Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They're just like the old ass like U.S. bomber that never goes away. Yeah, it's this really gritty kind of skeletal electronic song. Stop saying electronic because they're all electronic songs, but you know what I mean. Like, yeah,
Well, it ain't acoustic.
that's true. It ain't acoustic.
The repetition of like the word scud.
Yeah.
Towards the end of it, like scud, scud, scud.
Oh yeah, they're talking about like these Scuds missiles, and it's just going like Scud, 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 Scud.
The repetition of the scud thing here is more of like oh, see what they did, like we gotta go bomb them now, we gotta bomb
Yeah,
the
it's
shit
like
out
what
of
the
them.
U.S.
They can't
media
bomb
sounded
them.
like. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, oh my god, can you believe them? They're like, they have missiles. Like, we wouldn't do that anyway. Time to bomb them.
Yeah. I know. Yeah, meanwhile, like, these are, like to be clear, there's very little in terms of, like, air power and, like, you know, surface-to-air kind of capacity that Iraq has.
Yeah.
So they're basically just, like, flying over, and they're basically safe. Just, like, dropping all these bombs.
Which it says, like, explicitly on one of the tracks here that
Yeah.
that the like all of the U.S. planes would just like go straight there and back and like with no problem.
Yeah. Oh my god. The barbed song "We're Doing Well Now" it sort of continues this, talking about the bombings.
The Iraq basically cut off from regular food and water supplies as the Allied bombing began in mid-January.
We're doing our best to abide by the Geneva Convention.
Yeah, I find the title and the sentiment of a lot of the clips on here, like "We're doing well now," like really chilling. Because
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of like what I was talking about before with like the good war thing. It's like, oh, this is working just as we planned, and that was what we were worried about, not whether this was like a horrific thing to do and like one of the greatest acts of evil that like human beings are capable of, you know?
Yeah. Like, woohoo, we're doing great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like contrasted with the suffering and death that we're directly causing.
Yeah.
The Iraqis have been cut off from regular food and water supplies as the Allied bombing began in mid-January.
There's so many like really just like chilling parts in this song and really effective stuff. The part where they're has this quote of some U.S. whatever who's like it's like, oh, we're doing the best to abide by the Geneva Convention, and it's like it just keeps saying that over and over.
Yeah.
Interspersed with yeah, like, okay, hydroelectric
Interspersed with
installation.
violations of the Geneva Convention.
I know, just like listing off violations of the Geneva Convention. Like, oh yeah, bombing their hydroelectric dams. Oh yeah, bombing a fucking like baby milk factory.
Yeah.
that was a real one. Baby food, fucking. Oh my god.
Yeah, we're not making it up. Like these are like actual examples. Food storage and processing plants, flour mills, potato warehouses.
As like, I don't know, the content of the stuff gets more like serious and really like it like horrific. It's interesting. Like, you got to be really careful about like where the line is, you know, and doing like an electronic album. You're not like distracted or like using I don't know, this like horrific stuff to like in like a cynical way or whatever, or like in like sort of a poor taste way, like aestheticizing it or whatever.
Which I'll probably talk about later, but that is like the main criticism. Like it's kind of similar to the main criticism that I've heard people have about the album.
Yeah.
We can talk about what we think about that.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah. So this is like a really this goes very depth into the bombing.
There's like a clip where it says Like the editing is kind of funny. Where it says, "I'm annoyed about the propaganda coming out of Baghdad about targeting civilians. This has been fantastically accurate."
Anyway, I don't know. Should we talk about Nails in the Wall?
Oh God, I guess.
Yeah. So I guess
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah. Well, I don't know. I'll say I would say there's a reason, despite I would say this probably being one of like my favorite albums in general. There's a reason I've only listened to it probably a handful of times, like in my entire life.
Yeah.
I would probably link that basically just to the next song, which is well, yeah.
Yeah, it's. I think it pretty handily takes the title of the most horrifying song I've ever listened to, like bar none.
Yeah, I think I would also say that.
Holy shit! I mean, okay, so the describing what's going on here, nails in the wall, just like the entire thing really is just a soundtrack with what I can only describe as like the wails of the damned.
Yeah.
But of course, and I don't know exactly where it's taken from or like how the sound is manipulated to like very clearly what it's evoking is that it's like the sound of women like dying and like mourning the dying of like all of the people they know around them.
Yeah.
Prior to this, I think the album was taken more of like what's the word?
Yeah, it's like kind of bird's eye.
Yeah,
That's
bird's
it.
eye. That was a bird's eye perspective, and this like really gets down into like what it's like to be on the receiving end of this as like a civilian.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah, fuck.
Yeah, I mean, so maybe we should say, yeah, this is like the song is about the Amaria shelter bombing, which is basically a shelter that was in I think Baghdad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, at least in part. Yeah, it's in Baghdad, and it was basically it was this bomb shelter. It was actually originally, I believe, made to like withstand like a nuclear blast. Like it's a very thick, really this like underground shelter with like which in general was very well protected. And basically, so what happened was the U.S. targeted this shelter, and in this case, we're saying that a lot of what they were dropping were these like dumb bombs. That was not the case here. They targeted the shelter with two of these like laser guided, they call them like smart bombs. So these are extremely precision. These are like extremely precise weaponry. They know exactly where they're going to land. They know exactly what they're going to do. And so it's just a question of, and so if they bomb somewhere with those, then that was precisely a decision that was made very, explicitly. And then additionally, it was they bombed. So they had the top of the shelter was this big, like several feet of concrete with like metal wiring, I think. And then they hit it with one of these bombs, which made like a deep crater, and then they like used another to like the right where the first one landed to like break through the bottom of the crater into the shelter. And essentially what happened, and there were several hundred, well, there was, I don't know, I think a not even necessarily known number of civilians, but at the very least like several hundred that were all in the shelter.
Yeah, over 400 confirmed.
Yeah. I've never exactly been clear on exactly where this, what the like source of this was, but basically it was like in addition to just like blowing up a bunch of people with like the bomb, it released a ton of boiling water which just filled up the entire shelter and just boiled hundreds and hundreds of people alive. It's just one of the most horrifying things And this was like, this was not an accident. Even if, they had poor intelligence on this or whatever, they chose very discreetly to bomb this particular place. Even if they didn't know that it necessarily was like a civilian shelter, they certainly knew that was a risk.
Yep. And the U.S. Department of Defense said they knew it.
Yeah. There's not a way to spin this one. I mean, this is... Yeah.
Yeah. I guess the military itself tried to spin it, where they said, they knew, there's no version of the story where they didn't know that at some point it had been used as a civil defense shelter.
Yeah.
Like it's
yeah,
just...
and they probably had a Moss in there or something. Sorry, they had Saddam in there. Whoops. Slip of the tongue.
Yeah, they're like, they thought it had been converted to some kind of command center or military personnel bunker. Like, not even getting the story.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they didn't settle on a particular thing that this place was supposed to be. Yeah, it says it was plainly marked as a public shelter and was used throughout the air war by large numbers of civilians. So, yeah, that's on the Human Rights Watch website. I was looking that up.
Yeah, I don't know. It just so plainly puts, just completely wipes any notion that this is some good, there's good intentions behind this.
Yeah, and then it says that people stopped using the shelters after what happened there, because what's the use?
Yeah.
Which, of course, that's the effect of that.
Yeah.
And then the way the track ends with the question, did that have any effect on the conduct of the war? And the answer is, at the risk of sounding heartless, no.
Yeah, oh my fucking god. Ugh.
They burn in fucking hell, dude.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's like,
Shit makes me mad.
If you don't hate these people who run our fucking government, it's just like, you should. These people are terrible.
It'll radicalize you.
I don't know, they describe this scene in total awful detail.
Yep.
I don't know. I think just listen to the song, and you'll immediately know the experience where but yeah, it's just
yeah, we can't really get across just describing it, but yeah, boiled alive.
Yeah, this is just
I don't know. The song speaks for itself. It's just holy shit.
Yeah.
Yeah, hard to move on after that, and then
yeah,
I get the Aphex Twin remixed track.
Yeah, I know it's always such an interesting moment on this album, because it's because this next song, it's so excellent, and it's the most it's basically drill and bass, it's so it's super frenetic and super
noisy,
danceable and noisy, and really it makes you want to fucking move, and it's such a it's always just oh my god, I'm oh my god, it feels so weird to want to dance now.
It would be really an error to try and start.
This is kind of the climax of the album.
Yeah.
Where it's just going over the U.S. carpet bombing campaigns.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a remix of "Come to Daddy," which is one of his classic songs, but it's called "Say Hello to Allah."
Yeah, which holy shit, what a name for a song.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Yeah, I heard that's something that one of the soldiers was saying as he was dropping the bombs or something.
Yeah. The whole thing is this rapid fire of all these news clips and different people talking and stuff, describing the scene in these different ways. You just get this. It's too much information to really take in the moment. So you just get this sense of, or you just get this feeling of just oh my god, it's just all over. They're just doing this. Over.
Yeah, it's a way of simulating the overwhelm that I would probably be to be trying to survive in an environment like this.
Yeah. the track kind of ends with like the end of the Gulf War, which is Iraq like retreating out of Kuwait. And it describes this this event that happened near the sort of near the end of the war, where it was the which gets called the Highway of Death. It's sort of like one of these famous kind of like images and things from the Gulf War. It was basically this caravan of all these like retreating Iraqi like soldiers that were so they were like driving just like along this highway, and then they just got like bombed relentlessly over and over. And it's like nobody really, there's like no real good count of like how many people died, but it's just this like extreme, it was just this like miles of like of just like bombed out highway with destroy. I mean, if you've seen the images of it, it's really very immediately
Yeah.
just look up Highway of Death. It's just like
It looks apocalyptic.
yeah, it's just like holy fuck. Yeah, and meanwhile this like fucking hard ass like fucking remix of this Aphex Twin song that goes so goddamn hard. It's just like god damn it.
and that's like horrifying. Like the absolute power of it. Yeah, there's like huge balls of noise of that.
Yeah.
Like grimy as shit bass, with these like mile a minute break beats.
Yeah.
Like it sounds deadly, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really, I mean, this is just like this is just a like sort of a mobilization and like a sort of application of dance music, which is just so, I mean, I feel like it's just kind of like unprecedented. I feel like it's so yeah, I've really like never heard someone you know, take like electronic dance music and just kind of like use it for in such a like sort of surgically precise as like a sort of support of this like of something so like immediately kind of like sharp and political. And yeah, oh my god. Yeah, anyway, so I don't know, this track is just really, it's just incredible. I don't, yeah.
It's like earth shattering.
Yeah.
And there's church bells, which
Bells and the war's over and everything's fine.
By God, we've kicked Vietnam syndrome once and for all.
Bush says, "By God, we've kicked Vietnam syndrome once and for all."
God.
What's the syndrome? Like the consequences of your actions?
Yeah, it's just like of like losing wars. It's like we won this one.
Yeah.
Like
the syndrome is that sometimes when we do the evil thing, we don't succeed in the way we want.
I know.
Yeah, this song is like really eerie.
Yeah, it's like your ears are ringing. They like have that in the instrumental.
Yeah, it's a really cool touch. One of the first voices that's critical.
Yeah.
That isn't like being directly like hit by everything, you know. It's like a voice of reason.
It's like something about like he's like the ground war. He's like, there was no ground war. Name one battle. And it's like, yeah, no, it's just like this.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know. It's almost like a little bit. I don't know. Calling it like a war is just like kind of you miss something because it's just like this.
Yeah, like you've already accepted the terms of the propaganda by engaging with it on that level.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of the events of the Gulf War are just like, oh, here's something we did to them. Here's something we did to them. Like, here's this bombing. It's not like the battle of this place, you know?
Yeah. Sort of a set of tracks at the tail end of the album that we're in now. These are mainly focused in, well, first like the aftermath, and so it talks about, well, yeah, it talks a bit about like the direct aftermath of the bombings. So it talks about the death counts, and it's, you know, it's hard to say exactly, but in the hundreds of thousands, both, you know, soldiers and civilians. kind of numbers, and that's just from the bombings, and then it like sort of goes into, and I guess that's maybe more sort of getting into like no news is good news. It really talks about like the effects of the sanctions regime, which I've been trying to stress because I think that's like an important part of the story that gets sort of like forgotten about. It was because basically like they imposed these sanctions when Iraq invaded Kuwait. Then they like destroy all the like they like, you know, send Iraq back to the Stone Age, to destroy all this infrastructure so that they can't like internally support themselves, and then leave the sanctions in place for like a decade. Like these are just like for like over a decade. It's like and so during this time you just have like more, and it's again hard to estimate, but like at the very least many like hundreds of thousands of people who die from food scarcity, right? Because they and things like they can't get proper medical care. They talk about like they talk about like, you know, women getting like C-sections without anesthetic. All of these just like horrific things because they are just completely like cut off and unable to like repair themselves and all these like, you know, pitiful attempts to like send them a little bit of food or whatever, and like it's like it's just so like that's like a part of the story that just gets completely forgotten about, I think.
And it's like more horrific and torturous, if anything, than like the bombings themselves, because it's over like such a longer period of time that it kills somebody, you know, like the starving and illnesses and stuff like that.
Yeah, it certainly killed like as many, if not like more people. Like the sanctions, that's like a thing that just sort of gets like forgotten. So because or it's like, oh, you know, that was that's too bad, but like what were you gonna do? But it's like, no, this was intentional. This isn't like a thing. You don't just like put sanctions in place and like forget about them, and you're like, oh, whoops, I forgot to take the sanctions off. Like that's a thing that has to be actively enforced. You know, it's not like leaving the fucking stove on or whatever. It's like that's like a thing you're doing. It's just like actively blocking a country from like participating in the world economy. So it's just like so sick.
So like for the whole the entirety of the 90s, really, like just right up until 9/11, really.
Yep.
We just went right back at that point.
Yeah. Back and did it again. For some reason, somehow linked to 9/11. Yeah, like it took them such a fucking long time to get Saddam out.
It did. It was 2006.
It was like, oh my god, it's like the only fucking thing they can do is just like kill more people, punish more civilians, just to like get this one government out.
The good war.
Yeah, that's the good war. Yeah.
I'm just a ball of rage right now.
Yeah, no, you can get just so fucking mad. It's like there's so much like anger to be had, and it's just like, there's like the way this shit is talked about, you know. I don't know, people just still don't talk about this shit. They don't talk like this. You can hear about like horrific shit like this, and then go right back to like, oh, you know, the U.S. is like just a you know, struggling or to, you know, make the world into like a good free democracy, whatever. It's, you know, just like a flawed democracy working to improve the world as best it can. You know, it's just like
and I think like the main takeaway is that like really whatever like precipitated these actions is almost irrelevant, you know, like because there's nothing that justifies this type of military response. Doing that to civilians, like, doing the sanctions and killing that many people, like there's nothing that makes that okay, no matter what, you know.
It's like the way they'll justify this is be like, well, look how horrible this is, you know. It's never like it literally doesn't matter.
There's no amount of context that makes it okay. It doesn't matter what precipitated it, and it's the same with October 7th. It's the same with 9/11. There's nothing that makes it okay. So when people talk about how complicated everything is in the Middle East, you know, Like, oh, it's so complicated over there. It's so complicated in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't know how to have an opinion about anything, and like, or like, and you shouldn't either. Is like usually what that means. Like when
Yeah.
someone says it's complicated, like, oh, you should just leave it to the experts, which means like our government, I guess.
I know.
You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to know everything that happened, like prior to any of this. But like these, like genocide is not okay. Massacres are not okay. That's it. It's that
Yeah.
simple.
Yeah.
That's our stance in the album Spotlight podcast. I'm so mad.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I think we've covered a lot of the sort of the content necessary.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of understanding the how the album closes. I mean the yeah. I mean there's some really great. It goes back into sort of the more ambient leaning stuff. The instrumental on Dog in America I think is really interesting. The way it kind of like it sort of like crawls along.
Yeah, like this ambient glitch thing.
Yeah.
The other day there was a child who said to me, I wish I was born a dog in America.
Which could be like nice and calming if it wasn't
yeah
soundtracking what it is.
You know, it has this thing. It's like kind of mysterious, but also like kind of sad.
Yeah.
It's like a big thing, and you really feel like, oh, I see why it's sad.
And yeah, that last quote where the boy says like, "I wish I was born a dog in America."
Oh God,
like
yeah.
The life that I have, like, holy shit.
Yeah.
Like animals in the West are treated much better than him.
All this stuff is juxtaposed with the this quote Madeleine Albright talking about the the choice was very hard, but the price, and we think the price is worth it.
Yeah,
it's like
holy
has
shit.
it's just like fuck you.
Yeah. And that's in response to 500,000 children have died,
Yeah.
and is the price worth it?
Half a
And she
show,
just
yeah,
says
she said
yes.
that indirectly in response to 500,000 children dying. Oh my God.
Like, are you kidding me? Like, that's what we were talking about. Like, no, nothing is worth that. What the fuck?
Yeah.
Like, obviously, no.
Yeah.
That's kind of like how the album ends on the next and final track, To the Grave. Where it like intersperses her saying like that clip of "We think the price is worth it"
Yeah.
with like other clips of more details of the destruction
And sort of like reflecting on the whole thing.
Yeah.
And just like reiterating some of like the sort of US propaganda speak, which is like mangled and hollow at this point, after everything we've had. It's very
There is a much wider design here.
We think the price is worth it.
What else is that but genocide?
The ending, because it talks about Yugoslavia at the ending, which was like right around when the NATO like bombing of Yugoslavia, the sort of and, like the destruction, that was the the famous balkanization, like destruction of that country, and that's like sort of stated right after the like, it says very ominously this like, there's a much wider design here, which is like, oh man. It's so I mean, it is just a harrowing experience. It is an extremely unique, it really is like an experience. There's basically nothing else like this that there's things that like remind me of a little bit here and there, but like it's just like it's completely in a class of its own, I would say. I mean it's an incredible album. It's also a very difficult listen.
For sure. You gotta be careful with yourself when you're listening to something like this. Make sure you're in the right headspace to be able to take it in. Yeah, I do think it's really a masterpiece. I don't think it could have been executed any better. Yeah, there is. I have seen a few people online say that doing a project like this in this format of like an electronic music album is sensationalizing it or something. Wait, let me find
Yeah.
one of these. I don't even know if this
Always
is worth responding
stupid
to.
ass.
Now I'm talking
Yeah.
about it. But
You'll see what I think of that.
yeah. Let me throw this, read this out to you.
Yeah.
Frankly, I have no idea what they were thinking. The audio documentary component in part one could have stood quite well on its own without scoring, and then they scored it with IDM. With the music, it just comes off as juvenile and manipulative. Part two, unfortunately, is exactly the voyeuristic and exploitative, exploitative use of the suffering of Iraqis for whatever impressions Wakefield and company wanted to give to or really force on the listener. Part three isn't much better on that front. I could appreciate the rage and polemics if it came from someone who actually suffered from the effects of any of the events covered here, but I can find no indication that this was the case for anyone involved in this, rather than letting anything described here stand on its own terrible merit. Some white Anglo felt the need to edit this for what amounts to shock value. Ultimately, it's just appropriation, and while there are many of other things to criticize when it comes to how this was organized, viewpoints aside, that's not what I care about here. Given just how presumptive this whole thing is, it kind of feels trite to talk about anything else. What do you think about that?
I mean, I don't know. I think it's kind of silly. Like, just frankly, I mean, it's just like people don't say this about like Apocalypse Now or like any of these like war movies that are beloved and like what and like somehow music is maybe because it's like less serious of a medium or something, and so it's like not allowed to deal with horrible elements of reality that don't get
yeah.
Like there's always like if we're doing an artistic project, like cause like the response to that I guess is like the only way I could see that making that kind of view like self-consistent. I mean I guess they're like okay, it's like oh yeah the white people made it, just like okay yeah whatever. Is like listen to the album. It's clearly like they're clearly like very well researched. This is like
yeah, and using voices from people who are involved in it.
Yeah, like this is not just like some white people fucking co-opting it because they think it's cool or whatever.
Yeah. If anything, like, we have like more responsibility to like criticize our own government for their involvement, and I mean, even saying involvement is like kind of softening it, but perpetuation of these things.
Yeah, no, it's clear like so that's like I don't know. So I think that's just like a little silly. It's clear like you should be able to criticize your own fucking government without like being one of the people like directly affected. Like come on, but there's movies that are about the Holocaust and about like things that are just like extremely serious where real people died. And of course they're stylized because they're a piece of art, and so the only way I can see that, so they're saying, I think they're objecting to like, stylizing this. I mean, it's like, I feel like if it was like, just like some normal, like, I don't know, like film score music, you would be fine with it. But if it's IDM, it's like, that just seems like, I don't know, it's just like different genres.
Yeah, like what's objectively more artful about classical film score music than this.
Why is that more like worthy of seriousness than so
because like, that's also subject to trends as well, like film score music.
So it's like the only way I could see someone making that kind of view self-consistent is if you just think that art in general shouldn't touch on sensitive subjects. Unless it's like maybe a thing that directly happened to you or something, maybe I'll give them that. It's like, but it should never. Which I hope that I don't need to explain. I don't need to argue that that's like a stupid thing to say. I mean, I think it's just a fundamental part of like making meaning in this world, making like synthesizing kind of experience and like the messy disjointedness of reality into something understandable is like making art out of it. It's just like, I don't know. So I think and this is like so obviously doing that in such a careful way with just, as I keep saying, this like just like surgical precision, executing every little just like description of what was going on in perfect like congruence with this electronic backing music, which is like extremely like carefully produce it. I don't know. So it's just like, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think where it's coming from is probably the line of thinking, like criticizing certain anti-war movies for like through the medium kind of stylizing war and such. So that's like been and by stylizing it, it can kind of make people who aren't thinking critically about it. Like people who watch Full Metal Jacket or something and then join the military. It's like and you can argue about like whether that's the movie's fault or not.
Yeah.
I tend to be on the side. I mean, it's a case by case thing, but I tend to think that I don't know. It's a complicated issue, I guess, and I'm not gonna get into that right now exactly. But I don't think that really applies, like to the extent that that is true. I don't think that really applies to something like this, because you can't. I don't think there's really a way to engage with this that like glamorizes or uses anything for like quote unquote shock value. I mean, like, yeah, it's shocking. Like just I don't think the music is ever more shocking than the content of what's happening on this album.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think there's a way to engage with the album without reckoning with what it's saying and what its perspective is. Like, you can't listen to this and then just be like jazzed up about like bombing people or something. Like, I don't think that's really possible for anybody to come away from this album with that perspective.
Yeah.
And it's like, when you sit down to it, it's not like you're just, I want to listen to an IDM album, so I'm going to listen to this, It's like, you just listen to any of the artist's other work if you just want, like, some beats, or you could listen to the instrumentals on the second disc of this, but...
Yeah.
But there is, like, a vocal minority that I've seen online who holds opinions similar to that.
Yeah. That criticism would apply considerably more to a lot of like the famous sort of anti-war movies. That much more than I think it does in this album, because I think where it becomes like you run the risk of like aestheticizing and like, I mean, that's aestheticizing the wrong word, because of course it's aestheticizing its art, but like but like just like kind of turning into like a surface level kind of like shock value thing towards like a different end, like where that becomes an issue is like if you lose like the political like salience behind it and it becomes like you lose like this is like and I think there's just no risk of that in this, as much as there possibly could be. Like there's just like no risk of like losing the politics behind this album, which I'm sure is why it's not more popular than it is. Like this just, I don't know, this feels like kind of the gold standard for me, like for how you could make something artistic, which is captures an actual political message, which is extremely hard to co-opt and mangle into something which kind of like bastardize or like and disrespects the people affected by the thing it's talking about. Anyway,
But yeah, I think like getting mad about this album for not doing the subject matter justice is a bit silly, personally. Yeah, I am glad we touched on that a bit though, because there is always like when you make something like this, you have to walk that balance of not exploiting whatever tragedy that it's about. But yeah, that's most of what I have to say about the album. I think it's not for the faint of heart, but pretty much a masterpiece.
Boy, I would say so.
We've said a lot.
I feel like I'm talked out.
I think people know how we feel.
Yeah, I think we've probably communicated that at this point. It's gonna be a long ass episode. Oh my god.
Yeah. I imagine it will be. It deserves it though. All right, I'm out of here.
I'm out of here too. See ya, motherfuckers. Go and